Hello and welcome to this digital practice webinar, Removing Negative Reviews as a Doctor. It's a hot topic. We'll talk about the emotion and we'll talk about the facts and the rational acts and things you can do to make a change. So we acknowledge that this is serious because as a doctor, your main currency is trust. So we're very aware of that. There's certain reviews that could be about your person, your personal style, your approach, the energy in the room during a consultation, or something that happened along the lines as treatment was prepared or as surgery was prepared or afterwards. And then there's reviews about your staff, your team. You may think, hey, I'm lucky, it's not about me. But actually, when you put your business hat on, you know that this is also something that can actually be about the quality of your brand, the quality of your business, the quality of your whole service. So today we'll cover the emotions attached to that style, that type of reviews, and we'll talk about ways to deal with them and ways to remove them, because that's what this is all about. And I'll follow a bit of a medical pathway today in the webinar, talking about the anatomy of the Google review. Where do they live? Where do they sit? To understand what you can do about it. And then we'll talk about some acute and abrupt remedies to solve problems. And we'll also do, like you might do with some of your patients, we'll talk about lifestyle habits that can make you less vulnerable for an attack, if I can call it that way. So make your practice less vulnerable. Anatomy, let's start with that one. Because it's important to know what they actually are before you can do anything about it. Quite often I get this question, can you just quickly remove these negative reviews? And obviously, as you will understand soon enough in this webinar, that's not how it works. So you need to understand this anatomy, where they live. Anything that ends in gmail.com is an important digital asset in your business. If you have had multiple Gmail accounts, Google accounts over the years, it's essential that you clean it up, that you're very aware of what your main business Gmail account or Google account is. Because inside that account, that's where your reviews could be sitting, in one of your Gmail accounts. And obviously that ties in with all your other Google products that you might be using. Google Workspaces, Google Business, obviously anything to do with Google lives in those accounts. Google Analytics and Google Ads, obviously, not to forget that. They show up on Google Maps, as you know. They do show up as people do a Google search, and they show up when people look at your Google business profile. And combinations of it. Patients might be on their way to see you for a first consultation, type your address into Google Maps, and then read one of those reviews, and you could have a no-show, so patients not showing up. So all of that connects, and that's why this is so important, to really take care of that essential digital asset. And, well, this is an interesting percentage. It is said in recent studies that about 90% of us consumers, so your patients as well, pay attention to the quality of those Google reviews. So we can't just dismiss them and say, well, I don't really care if I get negative reviews all the time. It matters because it influences the choice of the next patient. Let's talk about the remedy. What can you do if some of those reviews are really damaging your practice? What's the first step? And there's a couple of plan B, plan C type of solutions that I'll present to you. And essentially, the crucial step is that lifestyle change. And maybe you've had this type of conversations. We can do surgery, but you'll have to change your lifestyle habits. This is a similar thing. We'll talk about those lifestyle habits towards the end of the webinar. So remedy first, what can you do to really remove reviews that are hurting? And my theory is that sometimes if it's really bad, it's actually a good thing, and you'll understand why. If it's spam, like in your face, bots attacking your business, if it's totally fake, someone who's pretending to be a patient, or if it's completely off topic, somebody mentioning that the pizza was lukewarm, obviously that is just spam. If that's the case, you might be in a really good position, because it will be easier to talk to Google, so to speak, and to have the problem resolved. Now, there's some bad news. There's some red tape around anything that we plan to do or that you plan to do in this area. Google expects you to understand and read the prohibited and restricted content policy. in full. So they expect you to have a clear understanding of why you contact them. It makes sense. These are call centers. They're overwhelmed with work, and there's not somebody sitting there and waiting to say, hey, Dr. So-and-so, how can I help you today? You're not happy with the review. Let's remove it. So that's not going to be the story. So there's some red tape that will help you overcome. So the easiest starting point is to go inside your Google Maps, Google Business account, and as soon as you see the review, there's a button there that says flag it as inappropriate. Now that's easy. If it were that easy to just click that all the time and remove the ones that you don't like, we wouldn't be doing this webinar and you wouldn't be participating. So why is it relevant to go beyond this? Because this is not going to lead to a removal straight away. So there's a couple of additional questions that you probably should answer before you even click that button. So when you're going to use that button, you need to know what type of arguments you will use. If it's clearly off topic or spam, that's an easy one. You just mention, look, people talking about pizzas, I'm a doctor. If it's spam because it's just gobbledygook or nonsense, that'll be easily identified as well. If it's a conflict of interest because you recognize the tone of voice or a clear allusion to a doctor who is a better solution, if that's the type of content, then you could choose that angle, being a conflict of interest. So you want to know what type of complaint you're going to file with Google before you do it. Spam and fake content, off-topic, restricted content, all these really clear examples of just practices that are not okay, that is easy. But of course, what we're talking about here is that review that is somehow not making you happy. It could be coming from a patient and you don't really agree with what's being said. So what do you do about it? Well, actually, this is about first exploring if you can file a formal complaint and a request to remove it, if the review falls under any of those categories. Bear in mind, it may take up to 3 days to process the request. That's another thing. You could go through all the trouble and expect it to be gone. Well, most of the time, it's not. Let's take a little sidestep here and talk about legal options. So when do you involve your lawyer and when do you go down the legal path? Because flagging it as inappropriate is sort of the first line defense, so to speak. It's explaining to Google that something's going on here, and someone in a call center can see straight away when people talk about pizzas or the name of your competitor is there, that's the solution. So when is it a legal thing? When do we step it up? When do we go to the next level and make it a legal procedure? This is an important URL to remember. g.co/legal brings you directly to the legal page in regards to Google reviews and things you can do about the removal. There's a nice little animation there that doesn't really give you extra information other than saying you'll have to go through this process. Now, I'll give you some tips and tricks to speed it all up and to choose the right options, because there is a whole list of options if you ever end up in that situation, and this is the fastest way to getting Google's attention. Now, you want to make sure that you relate this to Google search as a product, because that's where your problem sits. If patients find the negative review through Google search, that is your most burning question, so to speak. So you want to flag to Google that the problem sits in Google search. Next question, you have to choose from the options, and telling Google that the content defames you or your practice is the strongest and the most obvious choice in that menu. That will be the legal approach. Now, of course, and this is why we're going to take a step back to the human approach, going legal has two downsides. A, it becomes very legal technical with Google, and B, you will be paying your lawyer by the hour, as you obviously know. So we're trying to avoid that by giving you some additional options. And remember, the lifestyle habits will be your most resilient choice. Let's first take a look at that human approach. Take a step back. This is a person who has expressed an emotion. You're also a human being, and you can now try and see if you can resolve this in a human way. So, two solutions if you've decided not to involve the lawyer or not to file a formal complaint to Google, which is the human conversation with the patient, illustrated on the left, or the digital solution, which is responding in a digital way, using the actual review and the response to it, bearing in mind there is APRA restrictions. So there's an important choice to make here. First of all, if there's a genuine reason for the review and the negative tone of it, then the conversation with the patient might be the best possible solution. There could be a misunderstanding. There might be room for a conversation because in actual fact, your receptionist that day had a bad day and some things were done or not done or said that you now feel sorry for. So as a surgeon, as a doctor, if you believe there is some common ground to be found by admitting that something was less than ideal, then calling the patient or emailing the patient is probably the best solution. If you're thinking of just quickly responding to the review and saying, hey, I disagree, or can I remind you of the fact that XYZ, there's a couple of things to be aware of. APRA saying that you cannot be seen as promoting testimonials or using them to advertise has cloudy and sometimes very restricting policies around doctors and Google reviews. So that's something to bear in mind. It's still not totally clear what is expected of you as a surgeon in regards to Google reviews, because technically you're supposed to switch off anything that even looks like a testimonial, but you can't switch off your Google reviews. So we're penning in between. The second thing is equally important, the risk of breaching patient confidentiality as you go responding to the review and saying, hey, well, can I remind you of the fact that on this day of that year, you came into my practice. So if you do that, automatically you're creating a new problem. Sticking to that human approach, it's obviously very clear that we want to be in the right mood. If you're stressed or angry, or if there's any type of antagonistic vibe hanging around this review, well, maybe wait another 24 hours. My concern is always that looking at reviews, this is a direct communication channel to your future patients. This is not a place to be right about the past. I understand if somebody says something about your business, it hurts. So just flip that switch to bearing in mind that you're now talking to your future patients, not to the ones who are writing a review. And that creates the right mindset to write about the topic. Now, bear in mind, you cannot be seen discussing clinical outcomes in your Google reviews, well, in the responses to Google reviews. If the conversation is about the reception work, the quality of it, the friendliness levels, or anything to do with logistics, that's where you're still safe and there's no risk of an APRA complaint. You can talk about that. A big question I often get from specialists like yourselves is, can we do something to get more positive reviews? The official answer, if APRA is participating in this webinar, is no, you cannot. The other answer is, if you're from APRA, just do something else for 30 seconds, that of course you can be a really good specialist offering the best value you can, and that will trigger this automatic reaction of giving a review. And the way you phrase it when a patient goes out the door and is all happy is obviously important. You can't be seen having posters, give us a review and we'll give you a goodie bag. Obviously, there are ways to stimulate that behavior and still be compliant. So having more positive reviews will dilute the one or two negative reviews. And we'll talk about this whole concept of diluting reviews in the final chapter of this webinar. So yes, there are ways to do it in a subtle way. If you're not in Australia, if you're applying these best practices in other countries, you might have a lower level of legal restrictions to ask for those reviews. Now, as I said, anatomy, remedy, lifestyle. We're very big here at Digital Practice at doing the lifestyle thing. And the metaphor I use is similar to what you tell a patient. There are things you can do to avoid these problems. And there are ways, obviously, to be a really good doctor and really friendly team, but that's not exactly the topic of this webinar. Let's talk about doing specific digital things with your content that can lower the impact of potentially negative reviews in the future. So, lifestyle advice. let's bury these reviews in Google search. That's how I like to phrase it. We're going to make sure that when a patient does a Google search, plastic surgeon Brisbane, just taking that as an example, there's so much happening there that the 1 or 2 negative reviews are not hurting you anymore. A strong content foundation is everything. Like really having content pages in place that capture the Google search traffic of the incoming patient. So as soon as a patient does a search for a topic that is your topic, your niche, your specialty, I've taken antenatal care and obesity surgery, could be your own niche. As soon as the patient does a search, do you capture that with organic content that gives value, that gives something to the patient other than the reviews to look at? Now, these are prototypes of content pages, and it's quite unique that we're able to demonstrate what they look like in a webinar, and as such they look like a big long print. Obviously, as a visitor, as a patient, you would only see a section of that on your screen as you look at the page in more detail. It would look more like this. As you're scrolling the page, you would keep scrolling down. Now, why do I show this? Because this is part of this strategy of burying your negative Google reviews in Google search with amazing targeted content. So each of these 3 items here are totally focusing on one keyword. That's right. So this whole page that almost contains the entire content of a traditional website, this optimized content page replaces almost the content of a website and focuses on one major keyword. So that is a really, really solid and sustainable technique to impact what patients see as they Google. You would know that they Google in different phases of the patient journey: first conversation about a symptom, or first considerations when it's elective, after the first GP visit when new words and new terminology has been thrown around, and then later as they're in the process of deciding about what choice they will make in regards to their specialist. So that is where this content strategy comes in. Blogs are actually just additional pages you add to your website. It's a nice word, it's a buzzword. What it does is creating a framework so on a regular basis you add more items to your online presence. Again, pushing down the impact of negative reviews. Now, I know they will show up at the top, the reviews, but the overall experience will change when patients have more content to look at. There's other ways to make your impact and your control even bigger. Having a solid online presence on social media is one of them. Positioning yourself not just as the expert. Here I am doing something amazing. That is an angle I often see with doctors, specialists, and surgeons. It's good to demonstrate your expertise. It's also good to look at the other registers that you can open to build rapport, trust, and connection with what I will call the patient community. Anyone who at some point could become your patient, I call them part of your patient community. And the way to do that is to just look at other topics, and if they're not your forte, you can ask advice and involve medical journalists such as the ones here at Digital Practice. But having a profile that covers multiple angles creates more engagement. And Dr. Howard Lux, this post in the middle here, is one of my favorites. He's a US-based orthopedic surgeon who's using his Facebook profile not to just talk about orthopedics. He talks about anything medical that he can add value to, and then that gives him a really nice positioning as this friendly doctor who's here to help me understand even the impact of drinking too much coffee. So he and Dr. Tamara Hunter here in Perth, where we are, she does a similar job of not just talking about IVF, but really talking about lifestyle topics that are related to health to build that leadership position. And that is a really important aspect of this whole process of burying reviews in Google search. Because remember what I said at the start, it's an emotional thing for you to get a negative review. But for the patient, it's an emotional process as well, with a big question. Do I trust this doctor as a human being? Do I trust him or her with this essential aspect of my life, which is my health? And that's not just something we can resolve by simply removing 1 or 2 reviews. We need a strategy that goes beyond that just is on social media. YouTube is another great example where we fill up our channel, well, your channel, with value-adding short video clips that explain what you offer, that add more value to the patient experience. Remember, from the very first moment they start considering the treatment, all the way through to when they have actually become your patient. So that's an important aspect as well. The patient journey can be long, as you would know, and depending on your niche, there can be some recurring and some recurrent work involved. So you want to make sure your efforts to build trust and rapport are ongoing. Now, I had written down we want to focus on conquering hearts, and then I was thinking about some of the customers I work with, and as an academic, as a scientist, as a medical specialist, that's probably not a topic that you would describe like that. So let's call it trust, but still, it's the same. It's the emotive side of choosing a specialist, listening to what somebody else says. We all talk about word of mouth and referrals all the time. We forget that for a referral and a word of mouth referral to be a conversion, there is still this approval, this patient approval. We need to say yes to what somebody else is telling us. And the yes, we get it when somebody has checked out the online profile and given their final trust to that important decision. So it is about conquering hearts in a way. You do it with a balanced content strategy that really reflects not just the facts about your clinic, not just the qualifications, a story. Why are you the specialist that you are? Why are you into this specialty, this subspecialty? And why should patients choose you? Many doctors are a little bit afraid about that personal story when we work on their reputation management plan or their digital strategy. And the specialists who give in to our request to make it more personal, they can see the impact. They can see the impact because people stay on their pages for longer, because there's more conversions, people clicking through to other content. And there is an emotive component that is no longer this fluffy, weird topic. It's something real when you look at the data. There's a difference between a sterile, academic, online strategy and one that focuses on gaining trust. And the one or two negative reviews that come with that, they are diluted when there is this total immersion in content that provides trust. So what's next? I offer a free strategy session to anyone who is in this webinar because there is room for improvement. There's always room for improvement. And I love this culture of ongoing growth in a medical practice. So what we do is we assess your current reputation. We check out some additional content and visibility ideas. And remember, this is about burying these potential negative reviews in Google search content. Along the way, if there's anything that needs to be removed and that needs a more firm approach with Google, even involving their legal department, we can help you with that, choosing the right angle and choosing the right procedure. And obviously, when we do a free one-on-one strategy session, we look at live examples and we look at how this can be applied to make your reputation stronger. So you no longer get that stress feeling when a negative review pops up. So long story short, being aware where your Google reviews are living, then having these plan A, plan B solutions at hand, knowing where to go to have it flagged as inappropriate or to flag it as spammy or to file a formal legal complaint with Google. And thirdly, most importantly, lifestyle habits. Make sure you have a constant plan to work on your content. So there's not just the facts there about your clinic, but there's a human story that patients can connect with. And then this one or two grumpy review can no longer damage your reputation.